crazy how embedded those are.
Hopefully we have.
Hopefully it doesn't die on you again.
Well, one set usually lasts about 3 hours, so.
Ah.
Okay. So my definition of religion is belief in a meta-narrative, which obviously could change. And I guess the other point that's interesting in this respect is that meta-narratives compete with one another. Just like they're living, competing systems. And so there's dialectical progress from one period to another as they become more and more refined. Some narratives win, beat out other ones, and it could be because of coherence. If they don't make sense, then people won't believe it. If it doesn't tie into our actual living experience, then they don't succeed very well. Some of them continue on constantly back and forth. So, for example, Arianism and Athanasianism, as we were talking about that last week, I was reading from Ross Douthat that talked about how that still seems to be a conflict in the current church. So that throughout history, that constant back and forth over the interpretation of Jesus, for example, is present for at least 2,000, well, not quite 2,000 years. And also Steven Pinker, in his newest book, Enlightenment Now, which he basically argues that religion is bad, period, and that science is good, has that same conflict that I mentioned Richard Dawkins has, of thinking that science is meta-narrative free, that there are no faiths associated with, well, the axioms of Euclidean geometry are beliefs, so he's just, I don't know how the heck he missed certain, he lives at Harvard. He should have picked that up from some of the Harvard philosophers right there. In fact, his wife is a philosopher, Rebecca Goldstein. But not all philosophers pick up on this for some reason. In any case, it could be that they're against that for political reasons, because that they want to do is dash the hopes of anyone who wants to join a fundamentalist type religious sect. In which case they're basically lying to the public about the way they interpret things. That's my understanding of it. They're just basically saying all religion is bad because some religions are bad.
Yeah.
And they think that in order to get rid of all religions, including the ones that are bad, you have to do away with religion entirely, when the belief in science itself can be interpreted as belief in a meta-narrative itself.
Science itself becomes a religion.
Right, right. And
it's a revolving
Well,
door.
it's still believing in something. You're still believing.
yes, absolutely. And when you're looking at contemporary theologians, there are some out there that are just absolutely brilliant, that are, couldn't harm someone, unless it was a mouse stuck in a mousetrap in their kitchen. They're perfectly in tune with the humanist goals that Steven Pinker sets in his book. Perfectly in tune with it. In fact, I could argue that the historical source of those humanistic principles was Northern European Protestant Christianity. So I don't know why psychologically that psychologist has it out for religion in general, when I think it's obvious that as he details progress in everything, medical science, technologies of all sorts, transportations, farming, etc., he neglects the progress that religion has made. I don't know. So that's my definition of religion. Is that good? It's when you get right down to it, it's scientifically designed to annoy everyone and not satisfy anyone, because it's so broad that you can't escape being religious, which annoys all the folks like Richard Dawkins and others. And I'm not the only one, by the way. There's other folks out there that will point that out to Richard Dawkins, like Alistair McGrath, for example, points that out to Richard Dawkins in that one debate. I don't know if you saw it. And Richard Dawkins is just so frustrated.
Science itself, without a moral background,
Can't
can
be
also
good.
be a very bad thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're a good scientist, you automatically have to have some moral
Yeah,
basis.
because
Because
there are some things that really should not be done.
Well, and then you get into the cross of them both of Scientology.
if that, I
Which
never
is-
really studied that, so I don't know what. I just know that they're supposed to
It's a
steal money
religious-
from people.
It's certainly a religious system. It's a religion and everything like that. But they
They
don't
Isn't
really.
it the L. Ron Hubbard books?
They
Yes,
lie.
that's the guy who started it.
They lie left and right.
They do. They've
They
been
just
defined
sound like
as
really bad science fiction to
a
me.
corporation of Scientology because they're more out to make money than they are to.
Yeah.
But like they use these different techniques that is supposedly based on science and that sort of thing. Like they have these machines that are supposed to tell you how bad you are if you hold the little cans and get interrogated for hours, and it gives you a reading to say how bad. And it's supposed to be science, but obviously, yeah.
Well,
Perfect example of how science can be twisted to be used.
I
to,
remember when L. Ron Hubbard's first book, that Dianetics, came out. You better have a scientific thesaurus with you, and in English, I'm talking collegiate level English thesaurus with you
Yeah.
to even read that thing, because every 3 words were like this long.
Mhm.
Foot long words.
I'm like, okay.
Which there is a Latin expression for foot long words, and I can't think of it. That's one of my favorite words too. So that's really annoying. Sesquipedalian. It's a sesquipedalian word. Foot and a half long.
I'm gonna write that down.
Sesquipedalian.
That's gonna be my word of the day. I try to learn a new word every day.
So, when we think about the history of religion, obviously the monotheists were not first. We call religions prior to the monotheistic religions pagan would be one possibility. That's kind of late, actually, because that's the Latin word for those non-Christians who live out in the country. So pagano is the folks that are like not urban, basically still following the traditional Roman religions. But obviously the Egyptians were the first to have a particular sect, or whatever you want to call it, belief that there's one God, and that would be Akhenaten. In fact, I could torture you with something. This is, believe it or not, I think this is just, there's no action in this one. There is a version of the video that has yes, it's a male soprano. The role of Akhenaten in the opera is for a male soprano.
It just sounds weird coming out of a man. You have to forgive me.
And I know of no historical basis for thinking Akhenaten was actually a male soprano. Is this interesting? Never heard of the opera by Philip Glass.
I have not. It is enlightening.
You're gonna rush right out and go see it, right?
Oh,
I'm one of those guys
absolutely.
whose introduction to opera was Bugs Bunny and
I know
What's
which,
his name?
exactly
Rossini.
which episode you're
It
talking
would be
about.
Rossini, yeah.
And Elmer Fudd doing the I Must Kill the Rabbit.
Uh-huh.
Aten is the sun. So, but I believe that Aten as the sun was a metaphor for a single god.
That was Tutankhamun's father who started it.
Yes. And Tutankhamun was placed on the throne by the polytheistic priesthood that killed Akhenaten to get rid of him, because he was totally destroying the economy of the kingdom. Because what's interesting is when you look at the various temples along the Nile River from south to north, or whichever direction you want to go, they're arranged in a way that the pharaoh would have traveled from one to the next, and on arriving at each of them would have arrived at a time when the temple was arranged for the way the sun would come up at that time of year, so that had to be impressive to the people that the pharaoh shows up at this time of the year, and right then that's when the sun is lined up perfectly with the way the stones are, so that it shines into the temple, right, as, like, wow, so clearly this pharaoh has power over the elements, including the sun, it just must have been incredible. But that was also the occasion for each of those temples to receive all the taxes from everyone. So when Akhenaten decided that there was only one God and there would only be one temple and do away with all the others, that bankrupted all of those bureaucrats and the actual state, because the taxes were actually the way they would gather all the excess crops that then they could use in order to help feed everyone when the time a famine occurred, right? And so they killed Akhenaten and put his son Tutankhamun on the throne and returned to the polytheistic system that had been there. And it's believed by many, not all of course, but that the followers of Akhenaten, including the high priest, fled to avoid being killed, and then in that fleeing basically moved north and created a kingdom that became Israel. So that these monotheists that fled, led by perhaps one named Moshe, they were Egyptians.
Well, and something interesting with that is there is actually a figure in Egyptian mythology that lines up with the archetype of Jesus. There are a lot of, I forget what the character's name was, like Horus or something like that, where it's like line for line, just like even as far as like things that he's claimed to have said were word for word the same as what's written down as being words of Jesus and things like that.
Well, there's a lot of similarities, like the flood story,
I know.
generations, cultures upon cultures in ancient times going all the way into Babylon, They all had the same flood story.
The same flood story. Sargon the Great was rescued from being destroyed as an infant by being placed in the river in a basket of reeds. He was also born in a cave in Bethlehem, which at the time of Jesus' birth, that cave would have been like a tourist shop for people to come and buy Sargon the Great statues. So that cave has been a tourist trap for longer than Jesus existed. If you're going to be born as a god, you have to be born in that cave. That's the rule. There. Just so you know, this is kind of impressive, I guess. Freud, Moses. I don't think. I don't know if this will help. Sigmund Freud. Der Mann Moses und die monotheistische Religion. Der Mann Moses und die monotheistische Religion. So, one of those that argued that Moses was such an Egyptian was Freud, Sigmund Freud. I don't know that he had good archaeological basis for it, but there are others.
Well, Freud had a lot of things that didn't really have a lot of good basis. Yes, he was the father of modern psychology, but 80% of what he did was wrong.
But he was still impressive.
Yeah.
He was impressive in his wrongness.
Yeah. Well, like talking about Ibn Sina, Avicenna, his medical book transformed medical technology, but he was wrong about everything. but it was a step. You know, I could say the same thing. You know, a lot of people, we love joking about the Inquisition. You know, the Monty Python especially did lots of funny stuff about, no one expects the Inquisition. And they torture you by putting you in the comfy chair because they hate comfortableness. So they figure the best way to torture you is the comfy chair. Yes? No? I think that's kind of hilarious, actually.
I lived a very sheltered life as a child. I didn't see. First time I ever saw Monty Python anything was in high school.
My mom and I used to stay up and watch one,
I wasn't
but
allowed.
Benny Hill, so.
Now, old woman, you're accused of heresy on 3 counts. Heresy by thought, heresy by word, heresy by deed, and heresy by action. 4 counts. Do you confess?
I don't understand what I'm accused of.
Then we shall make you understand. Biggles. Fetch the cushions. Carry on. Now, old Nick, you have one last chance. Confess the heinous sin of heresy. Reject the works of the other. 2 last chances. And you shall be free. 3 last chances. You have 3 last chances. The nature which I have divulged in my previous utterance.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right! If that's the way you want it. Cardinal. Poker. With the soft cushions. Confess! 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 Have you got all the stuffing up on end? Yes, Lord. She's made of harder stuff. Cardinal Fang. Fetch the comfy chair. The comfy chair? So, you think you are strong because you can survive the soft cushions? Well, we shall see. Biggles, put her in the comfy chair. Now, you will stay in the comfy chair until lunchtime with only a cup of coffee at 11. Is that really all it takes? Yes, Lord. I did. I suppose it made it worse by shouting a lot. Confess. 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 I confess. Not you.
Stupid.
But funny.
Yes. So, the comfy chair. Yeah. It's supposed to be torture, sitting in a comfy chair. Because if you're an ascetic, comfortableness is torture, right? So
Yeah.
just goes to show you. What the heck brought that up? I don't know. But Jen Esmond's book, Moses the Egyptian, again, it's still hypothesis. There's no actual.
Evidence?
I was at Mount Sinai the other day.
On your Oculus Rift?
Yes.
Because that was a pretty fast trip.
Yeah, yeah.
Last week,
Yeah, it
last
was,
week.
actually it was late Wednesday night. I came home and I just plugged it in. There it is. Of course, I was there with my actual Oculus Rift, so, I was really there looking around. So this is the monastery. I guess it's kind of like the visitor center for people who are going to visit Mount Sinai, which for years has been the center of the tourist trade for people that want to go see where Moses talked to the burning bush and got the 10 commandments. He dropped the one stone. These 15 commandments. That's Mel Brooks. That's another. He's coming down from the hill with 3 tablets. He goes, these 15, and he drops one. And he goes, oh, these 10 commandments. You know. So in any case, what's neat about this is you can travel up to Mount Sinai by going up this path. Where is the path? There's another picture that has the path outlined. Where did it go? Here it is. Is that the path? No. Well, believe it or not. There. Okay, there we go. So you can actually walk up there. In fact, you don't have to walk. There are camel rides. You can ride the camel up there. And there's actually a little stone chapel up there that it doesn't even look as good as a pit toilet, actually. And in fact, I don't know what people do, because I didn't see any facilities whatsoever for anyone.
Don't step off the tray.
Which actually does explain a lot of the odd little plants that are growing in different places.
Yeah.
My mom's going to Israel in September. I'll have to warn her.
Well, this is Sinai, which is Egyptian now. In fact, what was odd, and the reason I did this Wednesday night was because we were sitting at the table. You know, Wednesday night, that's the night I go out drinking with the guys. And one of them said that he had visited St. Catherine's Monastery relatively recently. And it was alarming because when they got on the bus to drive to the monastery, you can't take a bus. It's a dirt. It's a trail. It's a footpath. Reminds me of like Red Rock Canyon or something. But if you he says he is taking the bus, and 2 guys got on with machine guns to protect them in case there were terrorists attacking the bus. And then one of the other guys sitting at the table said he had gone up there, must have been before Eric had gone up there. And he said, when I went up there, no guys with machine guns got on the bus. But they said, oh, by the way, you might be attacked by terrorists. And then another individual sitting at the table. There's not that many of us at the table. And the other individual said, well, when I visited St. Catherine's, it was under the control of the Israelis, because that was during the period when they had the Sinai Peninsula. And it was safe. So I'm thinking, wow, 3 guys at the table have been to this place, and maybe I had heard of it, I don't know, but I just, okay, as soon as I get home, I went downstairs, turned on, powered up the Oculus Rift, put it on, take me to St. Catherine, and it's like when you look at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, there's like 2 places that were highlighted. One of them was this place. So there's no, that's a huge place that the whole thing looks like that. There's nothing cheering about but so that's been for years, I guess, the place where they claim that Moses went up. I guess at the monastery was where the rest of the people were waiting for Moses while he was up there. And so, of course, there's all these tourists there. All the pictures, they're all 360 pictures that I find, with, this is Google Earth virtual reality. Go up, you see the camels. Camels can't go all the way up. There's a certain point where the camels get parked. And there's a guy with a turban sitting in a rocky little hut, with obvious, and there's plastic bottles from water all over the place. So no trash. Actually, there was one trash can up there, but no sign of services or anything. And plus they're sitting up there and taking pictures at sunset. And I'm thinking, how are they going to get down in the dark, Because that's the kind of trail, like, if you take, like, Flat Top, it's like, it's considered the easiest climb in Anchorage. But you know what? I saw a student break a wrist on that trail. So, you can easily find rocks and stuff to trip over. However, there it is. So where did Moses the Egyptian come from? But he's, of course, not the first. Abraham is the first. That gives us a monotheistic religion that, apart from Akhenaten, would have actually preceded Akhenaten. And that's from Ur of the Chaldees, which is a Sumerian civilization association. And remember, he left Ur of the Chaldees because of the sinning and so on of the community. And God told him to leave, and he's in the desert and with his flocks and his wife, and he's childless. And you remember the story of the Elohim who Abraham finds wandering in the desert, and he gives them dinner. And they're appreciative of the dinner. Actually, of course, it's Sarah, that makes the dinner, of course, right? And the Elohim, which is plural, so we don't really know exactly how many there were, probably 3, but they don't know if it was God and 2 angels, or 3 angels, or what. But somehow, because El is actually God in that language, so Elohim would be the plural of God. And by the way, that's also the root of Baal, or Elohim, or Israel, temple of the Most High God, Israel, right? So El is one of the words for God in that Semitic culture. And by the way, we have it in a lot of American names. For example, Mike L, Rachel, Ariel. You get the idea. You could go through all the names that have L in it, and you could go and look up the meaning in Hebrew, and you can see that it's shield of God, the sword of God, footstool of God, something, what, whatever. So you might want to look those up next time you're going to name a child. And you like the name Michael or Gabriel or whatever.
Yeah, I'm curious what my maiden name means.
By the way, I'm not guilty for this. This is not my fault. So whatever comes up, don't blame me. And it's not like I'm the messenger. I'm just pointing out this is interesting stuff. So Abraham is the ancestor then of the monotheistic religion the way we talk about it. I don't know how Akhenaten would fit into that. In any case, the famous story, of course, is that he is told by God to sacrifice his son. And that's an interesting dilemma because in the scripture, it's his only son. And remember, he didn't have a son by Sarah initially. She was barren. In fact, her answer was, ha ha. She laughed at God when God promised his heirs would inherit, and Sarai laughed at God, which is like that's famous, that she laughed at God. Because there's very few people that laugh at God and get away with it. You know. But I get the impression that the Elohim were drunk at this occasion, that, you know, the dinner was really good. There was something in it that was, and there's, your Arizal and heard all this. Okay, thanks. And Sarai laughs at God, and they didn't even notice because they were drunk. In any case, that's just me. In any case, the problem of her not being able to conceive because she was menopausal meant that if he really believed he was going to have heirs, then they had to come from someone. So Sarai offered her slave Hagar to her husband, and so Abraham conceived a son by her, and that's Ishmael, right? Which means God hears him, I believe. God hears him, right? And the problem then arises that, well, you know, but now Hagar is like the most important wife, and that's wrong. So Sarai insists that he take her away. Well, now you get different versions of the story, right, of this, because in the Hebrew story, she's only gone for a temporary time, but then comes back, and Ishmael is raised along with Isaac. But in the Arabic version of this story, she is taken by Abraham out to the desert where God tells him to leave her. And when he leaves her and says goodbye, she's in a panic and she runs in a circle around the spot where the infant lays. And while she's running around, which, by the way, is the source for this pattern, so when you look at this, they're all just praying at this point. But if you've read about it or seen it, actually you can put on your Oculus Rift and go and you can walk around, because someone took a camera and let me experience it virtually. They're walking around. The rock is inside there. That's a meteorite, which is also, it's been there a long time because Muhammad, there was a pagan temple there, and Muhammad basically took it over and made it the shrine for the one God. I think I'm getting that right. I brought this little book with me tonight, just in case we needed to check anything on this stuff. Point though, Hans Kung is a Roman Catholic theologian, but
A book on Islam?
he wrote a book on Christianity, on Judaism, on Islam. He writes, that's Hans Kung. He's a good friend of Pope Benedict, actually. Although they have even taught at the same place, though he's not a priest. Oh, well, it says he is. Well, wait a minute. But that's not the right outfit for a priest. What the heck?
It's Casual Fridays.
I think he's like,
Or maybe he's
his
an
priestly
honorary
faculties
priest.
have not been revoked, but he's officially not allowed to teach Catholic theology. The reason for it was he was a liberal, and Benedict wasn't. He's a liberal, and like marched against the strict conservative views, like regarding abortion, marriage, receiving Holy Communion, if you're living in sin, all that sort of stuff. By the way, remember the interesting comment that we get from Ross Douthat is that Pope Francis is a liberal in some ways, so maybe he's going to come back in favor before he dies. So that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm confused about that. I know he was a priest, but boy, I'm getting old myself. But when I look at a picture like that, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not normally how priests dress. Where did he learn how to tie a tie?
I still can't.
I can, actually, it's harder to show somebody how to do that because you're like
doing it in reverse or trying to. Yeah.
I've killed people trying to teach them.
I was in the military, I wore a uniform, but I always had the clip on.
Mm-hmm.
White tie. Clip, done. I'm not being choked to death.
So, well, that's not going to be helpful. Okay, that will be. Yeah, where's this picture?
There's it's illegal.
A sick bird? An ill eagle?
Yeah.
No, sorry, that's another dad joke, isn't it? But we didn't get up to that because, of course, we've got Judaism first, and Christianity second, and then Islam. Islam is 650 roughly.
Yeah.
AD, and so if you figure, well, we've already talked about Jesus. I think we talked a little bit about Judaism. But Muhammad fills a gap. I mentioned that Mecca at the time, that rock was the site of a pagan temple, as far as I understand it. But the area was officially Byzantine Christian at the time. In fact, the village that Muhammad, as a child, grew up in was a village that had Jewish people who were followers of Jesus, but who did not believe that he was God. So they were Jewish, that respected Jesus as a prophet of their own Jewish sect, but they were not Christian. And that's essentially the belief of Jesus that Muhammad grows up with.
Yeah.
And notice that Jesus is a prophet in Islam, and that's the way Muhammad understood him because of his childhood in a village where there were Jewish people that believed in Jesus but thought of him as a prophet, not as God. So we know a lot about Muhammad. There's lots of stories about him, but as usual, that means that a lot of them can't be true. The main story, of course, is that he's in meditation up on the mountain, and the angel Gabriel, he's the angel that shows up for all this stuff. Because, by the way, Gabriel was the one, I forgot to finish the story about Ishmael, because Ishmael is lying there in the dust, and Hagar is running around in a circle, which is what everybody's imitating at Mecca. It's what she was doing. But meanwhile, several different versions. The one, the infant's little feet kick up a well, and the well bursts forth, and the seagulls, who are, wow, they're an interesting bird religiously. You know, Utah has the same interesting relationship with seagulls for some reason. But the well springs forth, the seagulls come, to indicate that there's water. Arabs see the seagulls and know that means that there's water there, and so they come and Ishmael becomes part of the tribe, and so the Arabs then, as a whole, trace themselves as his,
Descendants of Abraham.
yeah, and to Abraham, right? And of course the Jewish people trace themselves back to Isaac. So they both go back to Abraham. They are Semitic, they're genetically related, and their languages related. The one summer I was going to learn both Hebrew and Arabic, which didn't go so well. I got up to Aleph, which is Alpha, which is A. I got up to Aleph. Bet. Then that's at that point that I realized, whoa, these are, the appearance is different, but guess what? They're the exact same alphabet with different, and guess what? The words, you start learning the words and you realize, shalom, salam.
Yeah.
Whoa, wait a minute, what am I dealing with here? This is almost like two regional accents of the same language. No wonder they hate one another so much. They've got so much in common. Neither of them like eating ham or pork, they have so many similar.
During the Eid, that's when they celebrate Abraham's when he was going to give his son to God, and then God said no, and then gave him a ram to kill. They still celebrate that. Both religions celebrate that. And the thing is over there, like Kuwait, places like that, is during that Eid celebration, there's a lot of sheep and goats that are just apparently no physical source, like they weren't hit by anything, nobody chopped them up, but 2 puncture wounds in the neck, they bled it out, did their sacrifice, and then hauled the thing off to the side of the road.
They didn't eat it?
No.
Thought they were supposed to eat it.
Well, I've been there, I was there for 2
Yeah.
years and 9 months, and every year
They did it.
they did exactly that. It's like somebody was going like, well, I'm a rich heir, but I'm not going to eat that. Just haul it out there to the side of the road. Because they set up these little, out there in the desert, little tent towns. And you see satellite TV, things pop up out of nowhere. And generators with air conditioning going into these tents, and lights all over the place, and they would all go out to the desert and celebrate Eid, and they would sacrifice a few sheep and goats, and then the next morning you got Indians driving along in big garbage trucks and dump trucks, picking up the dead animals and throwing them up to haul them off to the dump. The ones that made it that far, that weren't buried by the sandstorms. But every year, they would do exactly.
Well, thanks for that. I thought they would at least pay the animal the respect of eating it.
No.
However,
Now, maybe the poorer ones, yeah. But the ones that drive out there in the big fancy cars.
well, and the big fight between the two is which of the boys was the one that Abraham took up to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because if you have in the scripture, it's his only son.
Yeah.
That really sounds like it would be the first one, which would have been Ishmael. So I can see the Arab point of view on that. Then the Jewish tradition, though, says, well, but he wasn't the legitimate son.
He wasn't the promised son.
So it was Isaac that was promised, everything. And they're still fighting over this.
Civil rivalry.
It's not going to be something that you're going to be able to figure out.
No.
Unless you get H.G. Wells' time machine. Go back. It's like a bicycle.
And don't forget, you're gonna need some stealth mode, because if they catch you out there.
If they catch you out
You
there,
could
all
be
the
the
world
ram.
is you know.
Yeah.
You could be the ram that gets entangled in the bushes and like, oh crap, no. And of course he wouldn't understand English,
Yeah.
so forget it, you're done. Time, you didn't change time.
And then you would
Yes,
have
you
wasted
did.
all that time by
Yes,
trying
you
to go
did.
back and you
Yeah.
couldn't come back with the message that you went to go find out.
You would have, your sacrifice would have been the reason for all this hatred all these years.
Yeah.
Because if he had killed the boy, that would have been the end of that. wouldn't it? That's the deal. Let's go back and make sure he kills the kid. It'll
It's the
save
only way to bring
millions.
peace. Only way
Bring
to bring
peace.
peace.
Hey, well, we have a plot now
Yeah.
for a great novel. You know, it's going to get you in trouble though with a lot of people.
A little bit.
Yeah, but it will sell. Everybody will buy a copy so they could burn it. So Muhammad
There's the right stock margin.
ends up being dictated to by the angel, Gabriel. But since he can't write, apparently, he has to come back down to his older wife, who is richer, lovelier, and can also write. And so he dictates the Quran to her from behind a curtain. The only difference I've understood between that and Joseph Smith's version of how he did the same thing with his wife was that Joseph Smith was translating golden plates using the Urim and Thummim, which I understand are basically dice, in order to translate, which means, wow, he was really fast with those dice. But, you know, that's a whole other thing. But meanwhile, we end up now with the Quran being compiled over a period of time. But that's the theory, that it's dictated by the angel directly to Muhammad, and he dictates it to his wife, who writes it down. But actually, if you study the Quran, as you imagine scholars have done this, it turns out that some of the texts in it are actually over 500 years old. And so basically what we have is Muhammad's favorite literature that he dictates, and not having the actual text and not being literate himself, he would have just heard them orally. And so he basically relayed his favorite stories to his wife, who wrote them down as the angel dictating them, and that becomes the various verses of the Quran. There's all sorts of things about that too, that the Quran is not in literal historical order of any sort. It's in order of the largest to the smallest. Or is it the other? I forget. One way or the other. It starts off with, I could ask.
Doesn't he say in the last passage, in the last few sentences, don't take me or this book seriously?
I've never heard that. No.
I've heard that.
We call them verses.
Or literally, as I should say, the word term was given.
So this is. Yeah, they don't call them verses. They call them surahs. The followers of Islam believe that the verses or the surahs are so beautiful that if you translate it, you don't actually have the Quran. So, strictly speaking, if you have a copy of the Quran and it's not in Arabic, then you don't.
It's not actually, yeah.
It's not actually it.
the person that I know that Islamic is, yeah, they have to have a copy of, they don't read the Arabic Quran, but they have to have a copy of it in Arabic in order to have a copy of the Quran.
Yeah, I believe in the madrasas, the typical teaching is teaching the kids to read the actual Arabic. But from what I understand, they don't actually teach them Arabic. So they are repeating the verses without knowing what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Which, coming from a Roman Catholic background, that's not a surprise, because I found that myself, as a kid at the Mass, wondering why eggshells were important.
Yeah.
Gloria in eggshellsies Deo. That's not a dad joke. That's a Roman Catholic joke. Because as a kid, you're repeating the Latin.
Mm-hmm.
Even I can still Gloria in excelsis Deo et in terra. I could sing it slower because I'm rushing it. Instead of 33 and a third, I'm playing at 75. Etc. I can do that. But then ask me for the translation, and I'm glory to God in the highest, and on earth, wait a minute, I gotta think through, what's the translation? But they did teach me Latin, fortunately, for 2 years, which stuck actually pretty good. But it amazes me when you read that all these people are studying the Quran and repeating the verses without knowing what they say. Because that's, in some sense, the belief that God speaks Arabic. And, that's just really silly. What can I say?
When I was a kid, I went to church with my best friend, and they were Catholic. And on that particular day, they had someone from Rome. He read some passages from the Bible for 2 hours in Latin. Nobody in the room understood a word he said. He wore dark sunglasses too.
Oh, well.
And they said, "This is a gift." But,
It's a waste of time.
yeah, you've got 2 12-year-old boys sitting in a church on the floor discussing squirrels and frogs while this is going on.
So it wasn't a complete waste of time. So the first one was the most important one, from what I understand.
That's a lot of lives.
So that's what's the difference? So the Jewish religion believes that there's one God, and that one God has basically formed a contract, a testament, a covenant, lots of different words for it, with a particular people. If they follow that covenant, that God will protect that people. Over time, of course, what it means to say that they are the people of God, the chosen people of God, the unique chosen people of God, has, I suppose, changed. For one thing, if you go back and you think, well, the Egyptians are following them out the door, the parting of the waters, etc.
Yeah, wasn't that actually translated as Sea of Reeds? Not.
Well, if it's the Red Sea, there's all sorts of arguments about tides going out, Could it have been a tsunami?
Yeah,
You know, all sorts of things.
which there was one during that time.
So they say that happens there. We've had them here, I suppose. In any case, the best explanation I've heard from contemporary people is that the Jewish people are the people that have experienced being human to the most, in the sense that they've suffered the most and they've enjoyed the most happiness. Sounds like an interesting excuse for calling themselves unique, especially since you can't really explain why it is that the God who loves everyone didn't love the Egyptians quite so much. You know, these thieves running away with all the loot they could grab from the Egyptians, heading out, of Egypt, and God punishes the Egyptians that tried to stop them from going. That doesn't sound like a just God, Plus, they get to Canaan, and God tells them to kill everybody in the tribes that they meet, not leave one stone upon the other. Rape the girls if they haven't already been, taken by man or something. And it's like, whoa! If Hitler wanted directions for how to run the Holocaust, he couldn't have done worse than following the Bible directions for the Israelites, the Hebrews, how they got rid of all that's clearly genocide. In fact, it seems to be the first genocide officially historically recorded, if the Bible was a historical record. So that's pretty interesting. Of course, they could also have been the Hittites. So there's actually other historical people that could have been that, and so that would have been warrior groups, etc. But if you think, well, so that's the God, that doesn't seem to be a great monotheistic ruler of all, but instead a particular group's totem, as opposed to a God that's universally the creator of all and loves all. Even that God evolves. There's a great interpretation of that as book, The Hidden Face of God. That's not the one I meant. Shoot. This is the one.
Wasn't the number one choice, it was the number two choice.
How did that happen? In fact, I'm not familiar with that other one. But in this one, I've got several of his. You notice there's other ones above here. Who wrote the Bible? That one I have also. I don't know about these two. I don't know if you've had this problem, but I can't read every book that comes out. It's just like you try, and every time you go to Barnes and Nobles, they've got more books there that.
Yeah.
And we're already at the point where just bringing another book into the house is like
It's like picking up string.
adding water to the ocean. It's like, what good is this going to do? However, the neat thing about this book is that it starts off examining the nature of God in the Scripture and pointing out that initially you can come face to face with God. Moses does, and it's not good for him. That's an interesting dilemma. It burns his face off, basically. And there's others in the Old Testament that experience I guess the most interesting is the one that wrestles with God.
Yeah.
Jacob's ladder. Jacob wakes up from a dream, and there's a ladder going up to heaven, and a guy comes down it, and it's God, and Jacob wrestles him and beats him. So that's kind of intriguing. So yeah, you have stories where God is literally anthropomorphic, so that you can interact with God, but eventually you end up with God being the one who has no form, so that you're carrying God around in the ark, and it's sacred and so on. But it's against the rules to imagine or try to, create an idol of God. Right? God is now the vacant seat, which is so it's like vacant seats. Oh, I don't know what that's going to be. That's weird. That's clearly not the same thing. But the idea is that this is where God is located, but you can't actually see God. So, as he points out in the book, the face of God has, over the gradual increasing abstraction that we've seen in history, God has become more and more abstract, mathematical, in fact, right? So today, for example, even if you're Stephen Hawking and you claim that the grand unified theory, if we understand that, we understand the mind of God. Stephen Hawking, may he rest in peace, who just died, 2 weeks ago, clearly was not suggesting that there was some sort of physical human being-like creature that was God, whose mind was coincidental with the grand unified theory, and that's why everything was here. So I guess I should take a break. I should ask a quiz question. I'll go back to Akhenaten. Play some. So this isn't. There we go. This looks good. I'll play this while I'm downstairs. Have you ever heard any music by Philip Glass before?
I think so.
The Hours? Did you ever see the movie The Hours? Aristotle says that tragedy is important for a community. That you go as a community and experience a tragedy, a play, because it brings the community together. You suffer together, and that helps the community cohere, be united together in their beliefs and their spirit. But it's good for you. The question I have is, do you think tragedy helps prepare us for the eventual tragedies that we experience? tragedy teach us good practical lessons? Does that feel like a good, interesting question? Because, you know, Americans don't like tragedy. None of our movies are tragic.